In the unforgiving silence of the frontier, where every sunrise seemed to judge the weak and only the strong carve their names into memory, there lived a boy who belonged nowhere. He was small, ragged, and hungry, with eyes that told stories no child should have to carry. The village had turned its back on him, some out of fear, others out of indifference. He slept near the ashes of abandoned fires, drank from streams that ran colder than kindness, and learned that rejection cuts deeper than any blade. To them, he was nothing. To the world, he was invisible. But the West has a way of watching those who are cast aside. While the village mocked his emptiness, whispers traveled across the land, carried by wind and by memory. Warriors of a distant tribe heard the story of the orphan, not told with pity, but with a weight that stirred something older than pride. These were men who had buried brothers, women who had lost children, and elders who understood that the worth of a soul is not measured by bloodline or birthright, but by the fire that refuses to die in the eyes of the abandoned. That night, as the boy huddled beneath the stars, unaware that the world was shifting around him, the ground trembled under the hooves of horses. 100 riders moved as one, their silhouettes black against the moon, their presence echoing like thunder across the plains. They were not coming for conquest. They were not coming for war. They were coming for him, the boy who had been denied a name, denied a place, but not denied by fate. And in their eyes, he was already family. When the first light of dawn painted the horizon in gold, the boy awoke to a sound he had never heard before. Not ridicule, not silence, but the rhythm of 100 warriors dismounting in unison. They lifted him onto their shoulders, not because of who he had been, but because of who he was, a child who had endured rejection and still lived. In that moment, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was the center of a promise, that no one would be left to vanish in the dust again. And so, the village that had once scorned him watched in stunned silence as the orphan was carried away, not by pity, but by honor. A boy with no home was being given one by 100 hearts that refused to let him fall. It was a sunrise the frontier would never forget, for it marked the day the rejected became remembered, and the forgotten became legend. The warriors did not speak much as they carried the boy beyond the boundaries of the village that had rejected him. Their silence was not cold, it was sacred. Each man knew that dawn was not simply the beginning of another day, but the rebirth of a child who had been cast aside. The boy clung to their shoulders at first, unsure if this was mercy or some new form of punishment. His heart pounded with the disbelief of someone who had never been wanted, and suddenly found himself surrounded by more guardians than he could count. They took him across the plains, where the earth opened wide and the sky seemed endless. At every step, the rhythm of hooves echoed like a drumbeat, announcing that something had shifted. Birds lifted from the trees, and the air seemed lighter, as though nature itself recognized what was happening. The boy looked around in awe. He had no words, but he felt them in his chest. I am not alone anymore. For the first time in his life, the silence around him was not emptiness. It was protection. By midday, they reached the camp of the tribe. Fires burned, children played, women sang softly as they prepared meals. The sight overwhelmed the boy, who had only known the sharpness of rejection and the sting of hunger. Here, laughter was not cruel. It was healing. The warriors set him gently on the ground, and for a moment, he froze. What if these people, too, would look into his eyes and decide he was not worth keeping? But instead, an elder approached, bent low to meet his gaze, and placed a hand over the boy's heart. "You are ours now," he whispered. The tribe welcomed him with food, water, and something far greater, dignity. They did not treat him as an outsider to be tolerated, but as a soul returning from a long journey. The children circled around him, curious but kind, offering bits of bread and fruit. A girl braided a strand of leather and tied it around his wrist. These were not small gestures. In the language of the West, they were vows, promises that he would never again eat alone, sleep alone, or carry his pain alone. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, the boy lay on a bed of furs, listening to the sounds of a living, breathing family around him. He had never known such peace. He had been abandoned by those who should have protected him, yet found by those who owed him nothing. It was a truth the West often revealed. Blood might abandon you, but love, Real love is chosen. And chosen love is stronger than any tie of birth. Days turned into weeks, and the boy began to grow into this new life with a hesitance that slowly softened. At first, he followed the tribe's children from a distance, unsure of his place. But soon, he learned to run beside them, to laugh with them, to share in their chores and games. Each morning, he woke to the sound of drums calling the camp to gather, and he joined without question. His scars did not vanish, but here they were not marks of shame. They were marks of survival. The warriors began teaching him skills he had never imagined he could learn. He was taught to ride bareback, to track footprints in the soil, to listen for the language of the wind. His hands, once frail, now carried the strength to shape arrows and weave rope. And though he stumbled often, no one mocked him. Instead, they encouraged him, reminding him that even the strongest warrior had once been a boy who struggled to stand. In their eyes, failure was not weakness. It was simply the path to belonging. But the boy's heart still wrestled with shadows. At night, when the fire grew low, he sometimes thought of the village that had abandoned him. Questions haunted him. Why wasn't I enough? Why did they turn me away? The tribe did not silence these thoughts. The elders told him that pain must be carried, not buried. A man who hides his wounds, one said, forgets where his strength came from. These words stayed with him, reshaping his grief into something less heavy, less sharp. One dawn, after weeks of training, the warriors led him to the top of a ridge overlooking the plains. This is where we carried you home, they told him. The boy looked down at the village far in the distance, its rooftops glowing faintly in the early sun. He realized then that he had been lifted not to shame the village, but to remind him, in them, that rejection was not the end of story. It was the beginning of a greater one. As he stood there, surrounded by 100 warriors, the boy felt a surge of strength that had nothing to do with muscle or skill. It was the strength of being seen, of being carried when he could not walk alone, of being chosen when he thought he would never be wanted. He knew his journey was only beginning, but now he would walk it with a new truth, that even the most abandoned soul could become the most honored if given the chance to belong. Seasons turned, and the orphan who had once been nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the village now stood taller, his shoulders broader, his eyes sharper with understanding. The tribe had given him not only food and shelter, but a sense of purpose that no betrayal could ever take away. He learned to sit with the elders and hear their stories, tales of battles won, of sacrifices made, of children carried home when the world had turned its back. And in each story, he began to recognize pieces of himself. He was no longer listening as an outsider. He was listening as one of their own. One evening, during a great gathering, the boy was asked to sit beside the chief. The fire roared high, sparks climbing into the black night like stars reborn. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "The day we carried you home, we were not saving you. You were saving us, reminding us of the promise we made long ago, that no child would ever be left to die alone." The boy's throat tightened at those words. For years, he had believed he was worthless. Now, he was told that his survival had reignited a vow older than memory itself. But the West never allowed peace to linger for long. Rumors began to reach the camp, whispers of raiders moving across the plains, burning settlements, taking children as payment for debts not their own. The tribe knew that danger was closing in, yet their strength was not just in numbers, but in unity. For the boy, fear stirred again, but this time it did not consume him. He looked at the warriors, at the families who had embraced him, and he understood something powerful. He was no longer the one who needed saving. He was part of those who would save. When the raiders finally came near, dust rising like storm clouds in the distance, the tribe prepared. Men sharpened arrows, women gathered supplies, children were sent into the mountains for safety. The boy stood among the warriors, clutching the bow he had built with his own hands. His heart pounded not with terror, but with determination. He remembered the night he had been rejected, the loneliness that had nearly broken him, and he swore that no child in this camp, no child under this sky, would ever feel that despair again. The raiders never expected resistance. They thought they would find weakness. Instead, they faced a wall of defiance, built not from hatred, but from love. And at the front of that wall, Among men twice his size stood the boy who had once been cast aside. His presence was a reminder of everything they fought for. The tribe did not fight for land, nor for glory. They fought because the memory of carrying one child at sunrise had taught them something that could never be forgotten. Every soul mattered. The battle that followed was not measured in blood alone, but in courage. Arrows cut through the air like lightning. Drums thundered in rhythm with hearts, and the cries of resistance echoed across the plains. The boy fought as he had been taught, not with rage, but with focus, protecting those who could not protect themselves. He was struck once a cut across his arm, but he did not fall. Pain became proof of his belonging. For every drop of blood, he remembered, he was no longer alone. When the dust cleared, the raiders retreated, broken by a people they thought fragile. The tribe gathered in silence, not celebrating, but honoring. Loss had come. Every battle takes its toll. Yet the camp still stood. Families still clung to each other. Children still had a place to return. And at the heart of it all was the orphan boy, now bloodied, but unbroken. The chief raised his hand over him and declared, "He was once carried home by 100 warriors. Today he stands as one of us. No longer orphan, no longer outsider, but son." Tears welled in the boy's eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of those words. For the first time, he was not defined by what he had lost, but by what he had gained. He had become part of a lineage older than blood, a chosen family forged in fire, loyalty, and sacrifice. He was no longer a question mark at the edge of a village. He was a name spoken with pride around a fire that would never let him be forgotten. In the days that followed, the boy walked through the camp differently. Children looked up to him with awe. Mothers smiled with gratitude. Warriors clapped him on the back with respect. But more than all of that, he felt something deeper, the quiet peace of knowing he belonged. Not because of what he had earned, but because of who he was allowed to become when others refused to let him vanish. That was the gift the sunrise had given him, a new beginning carved from rejection. And so, the West remembered not just the battle, but the story behind it. A boy who was once unwanted had become a symbol of what happens when love refuses to let anyone be forgotten. In every fire that burned, in every drum that beat, his name lived. The child who had been carried home by 100 warriors was now a warrior himself. Proof that even in the harshest frontier, the heart could carve out a place where no one was ever truly alone again. The seasons rolled forward, carrying the boy into manhood. He was no longer the frail figure found shivering outside the village, but a young warrior whose presence commanded quiet respect. His scars had healed, though they remained etched upon his skin as a reminder of both his suffering and his survival. In every hunt, in every council gathering, in every moment of silence beneath the stars, he carried the weight of that sunrise when 100 warriors had lifted him from nothing into belonging. It had become his compass, his reason to keep moving forward. Elders often asked him to speak to the children, to remind them of what it meant to endure. At first, he hesitated, unsure if his voice carried the strength of those who had come before him. But one evening, as the campfire glowed and the little ones leaned in, he told them about the loneliness of rejection, the sting of hunger, and the ache of being invisible. He spoke not to frighten them, but to show them how even the smallest flame can survive when everything else turns to ash. And when he finished, their eyes were wide not with pity, but with pride. The tribe began to look to him as more than a survivor. He was becoming a storyteller, a keeper of memory. His tale was not his alone anymore. It was woven into the fabric of the people, carried in the songs the women sang, whispered in the games the children played, remembered in the silence of the warriors who had once lifted him upon their shoulders. The boy had been rescued, but the man was now rescuing others from despair, from forgetting, from the same silence that had nearly taken him. One day, while riding across the plains, he returned to the village that had once cast him out. The people were older now, their faces etched with guilt and time. They stared at him with unease, unsure if he had come for vengeance. But he carried no weapons, only the quiet dignity of someone who had been broken and remade. He walked through the center of that place and said only, "You tried to erase me, but I became a story you can never silence." Then he left, his words lingering like thunder after lightning. That night, As he returned to his tribe, he sat alone on a ridge, staring at the horizon. He realized something profound. The West was not just about survival of the strongest. It was about survival of the remembered. He had been given a gift far greater than a home. He had been given the power to transform pain into purpose, rejection into belonging, and silence into song. And as the stars burned above him, he swore that no child under that sky would ever again feel the loneliness he once carried. The years that followed tested him in new ways. Drought struck the plains, thinning herds and tightening bellies. Rival tribes pressed in, their desperation twisting into conflict. Yet in every hardship, the boy, now a man, became a steady hand, a quiet anchor for his people. When others despaired, he reminded them of that morning when 100 warriors had carried him home. "We survived because we remembered," he would say, "and we will survive again because memory never dies." His reputation spread across the frontier. Strangers came seeking wisdom, hoping to hear the truth from his lips. Some brought offerings of food, others gifts of carved wood or woven cloth. But he never accepted treasures. He only asked for stories of their struggles, their loves, their losses. He knew that every tale was a thread in the fabric of survival, and he collected them like seeds, planting them in the minds of the young so they would know they were not alone. To him, storytelling was not entertainment. It was salvation. But not everyone admired what he had become. There were those who despised his strength, jealous of the respect he commanded without seeking it. Whispers of betrayal returned, not from his family, but from outsiders who wanted to fracture what had been built. One night, a group of men tried to ambush him near the river. Yet when they confronted him, they found themselves unable to strike. His calm gaze disarmed them more than any weapon could. "I was raised by rejection," he told them. "Your hatred is nothing new." And with those words, they fled, ashamed. In time, the man returned to the ridge where his life had changed forever. He stood at the very place where dawn had broken with 100 shadows rising around him. Closing his eyes, he remembered every face, every hand that had carried him. Some had passed into the spirit world, others still walked beside him, but all of them lived within him. And as the sun rose once more, he whispered, "I will carry others, just as you carried me." It was not a vow. It was a destiny already unfolding. From that day, he became more than a survivor, more than a warrior. He became a bridge between past and future, between sorrow and strength. His life was proof that even the smallest, most unwanted child could rise to become the memory of a people. And in the Old West, where so many lives were lost to silence and dust, his story rang like a bell through the canyons, a reminder that belonging is not given by birth, but by love chosen at sunrise. The man's life unfolded like a long trail across the frontier, filled with dust, hardship, and moments of light. Each season, new children were born into the tribe, and with every cry of a newborn, he felt a fire rekindled within him. He was no longer the boy who had been rejected. He was the elder brother, the protector, the living proof that no soul should be abandoned. He taught the young to ride, to hunt, but more than that, to honor one another's scars. "Your wounds," he would say, "are not what break you. They are what bind you to the rest of us." With time, the chief grew old, his once steady hands shaking like leaves in the wind. The tribe began to look toward the man who had risen from nothing, who carried no bloodline, but carried the spirit of their people as if it were carved into his bones. And though he never sought authority, he accepted the weight of leadership. For him, being chosen was not about pride. It was about duty, the same duty that had lifted him at sunrise years before. He carried it with humility, knowing that his life had been borrowed once, and he now owed it back to everyone. The man often returned to the ridge where his fate had changed. Sometimes he went alone, sometimes with children who begged for the story. Standing on the high ground, he would point to the horizon and tell them of the morning when 100 warriors came, not to conquer, but to carry. He made them understand that strength is not found in isolation, but in the arms of those willing to lift you when you cannot walk. And the children, eyes wide, would promise that they too would carry others when their time came. One autumn, a famine struck the land, and the tribe faced hunger like they had not known in decades. Neighboring villages, once distant, now came seeking help. Some leaders urged to turn them away, to preserve what little they had. But the man remembered what it meant to be turned away. He stood before his people and declared, "We survive not by keeping, but by sharing. We were saved once by 100 hands. Let us now be those hands for others." And so the tribe opened their stores, risking their own hunger to keep strangers alive. It was an act that bound them to history, remembered for generations. By the time winter ended, songs about the orphan boy carried home by warriors were sung not just in his tribe but across the plains. Travelers repeated the tale, changing details, exaggerating numbers, but always keeping the truth. That love chosen is stronger than blood given, and that belonging can rise from the ashes of rejection. And as those songs spread, the man smiled quietly, knowing that he no longer needed to tell his story. The world itself had taken it, shaping it into legend. Years passed, and the boy who became a man was now spoken of as an elder, though his hair was only streaked with silver. His voice was softer, but his presence was heavier, like the roots of a tree that cannot be moved. People from distant lands came seeking him, not because he held riches or armies, but because he carried memory, and in the Old West, memory was rarer than gold. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words fell like water on dry soil, reviving what had long been forgotten. One evening, as the sun fell low, he gathered the tribe for a ceremony. The drums beat slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the earth. He told them, "The morning I was carried home was not about saving one boy. It was about reminding the world that no life is too small to lift." He placed a hand on the shoulder of a young orphan girl who had recently been taken in, her eyes wide with the same fear he once knew. "She is proof that the story is not finished. Each of you will write it again, every time you choose to carry another." The tribe wept, not from sorrow, but from recognition. They understood now that what had once seemed like a single act of mercy was in fact a thread woven through time, binding generations together. The man had not only survived rejection, he had transformed it into the foundation of a people's identity. His pain had become their promise. And in the West, where so many were forgotten, this promise burned brighter than any fire. Later that night, as the stars crowded the sky, the man sat by the fire with his closest companions. He spoke of the fear he had carried as a child, the loneliness that had nearly crushed him, and the miracle of being lifted when he thought no one would ever notice him again. He said, "I was once invisible. Now I see everyone." And in those words lay the essence of his life. Not power, not wealth, but vision born of suffering. The story of the orphan carried home at sunrise did not end with him. It became a law of the heart for his tribe. No one would ever again be left behind. And so, his name, once forgotten, once unwanted, became eternal, carried not in stone or paper, but in the choices of every hand that reached out, every warrior who lifted a child, every voice that sang beneath the endless sky of the West. With each passing year, the man's story grew heavier, not as a burden, but as a mantle. He began to see how the moment he was carried home had shaped not just his life, but the path of the entire tribe. Leaders came and went, seasons changed, and children grew into warriors. Yet the memory of that dawn remained unbroken. Whenever disputes arose, when pride threatened to divide, the elders would point to him and say, "Remember the boy who was lifted when he was alone." And silence would always follow, because no one could argue with the weight of that truth. The man himself never sought to become more than what he was. He worked the land with the others. He hunted when the tribe needed food, and he sat in council not with authority, but with humility. Yet people looked to him differently. His presence carried a kind of reassurance that even in the darkest storms, something stronger held them together. And when strangers arrived from distant places, hungry, wounded, or lost, he was the first to welcome them, often whispering the same words once spoken to him, "You are ours now." But the West was changing. The sound of iron rails began cutting across the plains, bringing settlers, soldiers, and laws that did not understand the rhythm of the land. The tribe feared what was coming: the loss of their hunting grounds, the intrusion of strangers who did not honor the same vows. Some whispered of leaving, others of fighting. The man listened to both sides, then spoke with the voice of someone who had seen both cruelty and mercy. "We are not defined by what they take," he said. "We are defined by what we carry. If we lose the land, we carry the people." These words were not easy to hear, but they steadied hearts. He reminded them that their strength had never been in walls or weapons, but in the way they refused to abandon one another. He told them that just as 100 warriors had carried him, so must they carry each other through the storms ahead. And though fear lingered, courage took root again, because his life itself was living proof that survival was not about what was lost, but about who refused to be left behind. That winter, when food grew scarce and tensions thickened, he gathered the tribe around the fire and retold his story from beginning to end, not as a legend, but as a memory. His voice cracked, his eyes shone, but his words burned steady. "The day I was carried was the day I learned that no soul is too small to save. That promise is no end." And the people listened, not with their ears, but with their hearts, carrying his vow deeper into themselves. In his later years, the man became slower in step, but his spirit only grew stronger. Children followed him like shadows, eager to hear his stories, and even the youngest warriors treated him with a reverence usually reserved for chiefs. He often sat beneath the great cedar tree, staff in hand, watching the sky change from blue to gold, and whispered prayers of gratitude for the life he had once thought would never be his. He was living proof that rejection is not a death sentence. It is only the beginning of a different kind of journey. One evening, as the tribe gathered, he lifted the braided leather band that the girl had once tied to his wrist when he first arrived. It was worn and frayed, yet it had lasted as long as he had. He placed it on the wrist of a young boy, recently orphaned, who had come to the tribe, trembling with fear. "This was given to me when I thought I had nothing," he said softly. "Now it is yours. And from this day, you carry us all, as we carry you." The boy's tears fell freely, and the circle of warriors around them wept as well, for they knew the story had come full circle. The man passed quietly in his sleep not long after, beneath a sky clear and endless. There was no panic, no despair, only peace. At sunrise, just as it had happened for him long ago, 100 warriors carried him home, not because he was weak, but because he was theirs. The echo of hooves across the plain was both farewell and promise, binding his memory into the earth itself. He had been rejected once, but now he was carried forever. His grave was marked not with stone, but with song. For generations, the people sang of the orphan who was lifted by love, who grew into a man who lifted others, and who proved that no rejection can erase the worth of a soul. His story became more than a tale. It became a vow, whispered into the ears of every child who feared being forgotten. You will never be left behind. And so, in the Old West, a land that swallowed many lives whole, his name lived on, not written in ledgers or carved into walls, but carried in the rhythm of drums, in the memory of fires, in the promise of sunrise. For every time the tribe lifted another lost soul, they remembered him. The boy who was once rejected, yet carried home by 100 warriors, had become eternal. The tale of the orphan boy reminds us that even the most fragile soul, rejected and forgotten, can carry within it the spark that transforms an entire people. What began as a story of abandonment became a legend of unity, where 100 warriors chose to rewrite his destiny with their own strength. His journey teaches us that belonging is not given by chance, but forged through love, sacrifice, and the courage to lift others when the world turns away. Through his eyes, we see that rejection is never the end. It is the beginning of a new path, one that can lead to greater purpose if we dare to walk it with open hearts. The boy who once wandered in silence grew into a man whose life became a vow, proving that the truest families are not always bound by blood, but by the promises we make to never leave anyone behind. His story is not about survival alone, but about transformation. The Old West was often cruel, a land that devoured the weak and celebrated only the strongest. Yet the story breaks that mold. It reminds us that true strength is not found in violence, but in compassion, not in standing alone, but in carrying one another through storms. The boy was carried once, but through his life, He carried countless others, turning pain into legacy and legacy into hope. As the sun rises on his memory, we are left with a question. In a world still marked by indifference, who will we choose to carry? Each act of kindness, each choice to see value in someone overlooked, echoes the promise those 100 warriors made. His story lingers not as a distant legend, but as a living challenge to us all, to remember, to lift, and to belong together. If this story touched your heart, let it live beyond this moment. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale that brings the West and its timeless lessons back to life. Like this video if you believe compassion is stronger than cruelty, and share in the comments what part of the orphan's journey spoke to you most. Because stories like his are not just meant to be told, they are meant to be remembered, carried, and passed on.